The multiverse is a concept that sounds really cool the first time you hear it. It's basically the game that you invented with your friends where you were doing zoomies in the backyard pretending to be Spider-Man fighting against Mewtwo or whatever. All sorts of possibilities open up just by saying the word multiverse. But we're in this phase where all corporations now know how cool it sounds, and so they're just out here drilling it into our frontal cortexes to no end. And recently they released a game called MultiVersus, and its entire business model seems to be, let's just get as many IPs stuffed in here as we can and see who spends money on this. Which is a terrific business idea, don't get me wrong. If you're telling me that I can pick up the Iron Giant, famously known for hating violence, and I can punch children in the face with him, then I'm sold. On a primal monkey brain level, I could care less why these characters are fighting. I just like punching things. But my entire internet presence consists of looking at video games and asking one question: why? Because therein lies the problem. When you have a crossover special, you have to take some liberties with the lore and the canon. And when you get to the why of it all, sometimes the answers aren't very satisfying. So the goal with this video is to look at multiverses and 3 other games based around the multiverse crossover concept and see how well they manage to sell you on their multiverse and get you to forget that it's just a late-stage capitalistic way of making people clap their hands and bark like a seal in heat before swiping their mom's credit cards. So let's just start with multiverses because that's the game that inspired this video. Multiverses revolves around a central antagonist known as the Nothing, who is a malevolent entity whose primary goal seems to be the destruction of the multiverse. A popular fan theory is that the Nothing is the Nothing from the Neverending Story, which makes sense because the IP is owned by Warner Brothers, and the Nothing is the culmination of all disbelief in fantasy and fairy tales, and as such it seeks to destroy any and all lands of fantasy. Which is a little on the nose coming from Warner Brothers Discovery, don't you think? As part of the Nothing's efforts to destroy all universes, the Great Dimensional Cataclysm occurred. The first planet to be destroyed by this event was called Xanaphir, which was home to a royal family and their loyal guardian named Raindog. Raindog was the only survivor of that attack, but he remained confident that he could save Xanaphir and reunite with his family with the use of his trusty gem. The Great Dimensional Cataclysm also seems to have caused several anomalies across the multiverse, one of which spawned a magic rock in the same canon as the original Scooby-Doo cartoon, and then Shaggy found it, he thought it was candy, and he ate it, only to be given superpowers. That's how they're explaining the Shaggy 1% meme that they just put into existence to get your money. Sometime after this, several heroes and villains from across the multiverse were all teleported to the same location. Trailers indicate that this didn't happen all at once, but rather has been a process that's been going on over time, which seems like this will be their explanation for new characters coming in as time goes on. And dialogue from the Multiverses tutorial indicates that Raindog's gem is granting people the power to manifest others into this shared universe area. There are a few exceptions for characters who entered willingly, like Gizmo, who somehow followed Stripe to make sure that he didn't bring harm to others, and Rick Sanchez, who arrived with the portal gun, likely in search of his grandson Morty. Multiverses has a PvP mode and a PvE story mode, and from my understanding, based on trailer footage, the reason why people are fighting each other, regardless of if they're both heroes or both villains, is because of the sheer pandemonium that comes with being suddenly teleported from your home dimension to a strange different dimension. The lore explanation for the PvP mode is that they just team up with whoever is next to them and face off against whoever's across the aisle from them and throwing punches their way, which, alright, fair enough, I guess. We see Wonder Woman face off against 3 other Wonder Women, and we hear her say that she can only trust herself, which supports the reason for why they're fighting and also grants us the knowledge that multiple variants of each character are being pulled in from different time periods or just other universes entirely. My guess is that, canonically speaking, the PvP mode all takes place when the heroes are all teleported to this shared dimension, and once they finally get their shit together and realize that there are more pressing matters at hand, like the existential multiversal threat called the Nothing, that's when they divide up into their factions and try to organize against the Nothing, which is when the PvE story mode occurs. It's important to note that that part is just my theory, and I'm being as generous as possible to Warner Brothers with this. But what's not a theory and is actually explained in the story mode is that some characters are uniting to save the universe because they know it's the right thing to do, or they just like the universe. Some are uniting just to oppose the heroes, and others like Marvin the Martian are just trying to conquer land in this new dimension for the cause of their own planetary glory. Also, dialogue suggests that the rewards you get for winning fights are real and tangible things to the fighters, and so it's possible that some characters are purely in it for that. At this point, you might be thinking, okay, well, that's all well and good, not freaking Nick, but why are there villains here if Raindog is the one who has the power to manifest people? Both the trailers and the PvE mode show us that the reason why this is happening is because it's not just Raindog who is manifesting people, because his gem was stolen from him. After Stripe, the gremlin, arrived, he stole the gem from Raindog and used it to manifest the Joker, who in turn manifested Jason Voorhees, Agent Smith from the Matrix, and several variants and villains that were loyal to him. When you get to the Joker and demand that he give you back the gem, he reveals that Stripe took it back, and when you get to Stripe, Stripe reveals that Jason Voorhees stole it from him. At the time of recording this, that's all that's available in the Rift mode or the story mode, but they have several future installments that will arrive in the coming weeks, but it all just seems like it's a wild goose chase to get the gem back so Raindog can resume his goal to unite the heroes against the Nothing and save the multiverse. Another interesting aspect of the Rift mode is that there are characters who are genuinely well-meaning, but they oppose you simply because they don't trust your judgment. Like in one of the missions, you have to fight against Garnet because she thinks the gem is better off in her hands. I think that's just a nice touch. After studying up and reading on all of the lore behind multiverses, I still have a few questions that remain unanswered. The main one is what dimension this all takes place. The theories that I've seen people throw out is that it's either the Matrix or the Serververse, which is where Space Jam 2 takes place, along with the Looney Tunes and LeBron James. It would also explain why Agent Smith is able to be there because he's an AI and the Serververse is a digital area. And there's still the issue that several characters don't behave the way that they normally would in multiverses, most notably... But I guess we just have to wave our hand and say because multiverse. I think what multiverses could have used to sell us on the lore a little bit more is more original characters in the roster. Right now we've only got Raindog and the whole plot just hinges on him. Which, don't get me wrong, he's a very good boy, but the way the plot shakes out means we're supposed to believe that a good 80% of what is impeding our heroes from uniting and stopping the Nothing is the fact that Raindog made an oopsie and threw a gremlin into the mix while bringing in people like Batman. I hope that they come up with a reveal that Raindog wasn't the only survivor of Xanathir, and there's another Xanathirian who is more nefarious intentions, and he's the one who brought in Stripe. But I'm not holding my breath because why spend the time to create a character that nobody wants to spend $10 on when you can add a childhood's worth of monetizable nostalgia? So does this multiverse work? I'd say kind of. The characters take a lot of hits to the way that they would probably act in the situations, and the story is really basic, but I think what breaks the immersion the most is the fact that Warner Brothers is very meta and open about how this is all a ploy to take your money. Like, there's a part where the Joker brings in Rick and Morty to fight you, and he's like, now that's a crossover. There is also a leak that there's going to be an anime character coming to multiverses, and there's a voice line from Rick that he says when he sees this anime character. Let's listen to that.
They start getting anime crossovers in here, that's when you really know the maw of capitalism is going down on this shit.
So yeah, while it's never not cool to have a crossover fighting game and have your favorite characters punch the crap out of each other, this game is barely a step above having David Zaslav himself come out during the opening cutscene and be like, "F you, give me your money or I'll wait until Dune 3 is finished and then scrap it." Now let's move on to Fortnite, the most popular game in the world. Fortnite revolves around a central antagonist known as the Nothing, who is a malevolent entity whose primary goal seems to be the destruction of the multiverse. That sounded a little familiar. Except in Fortnite they use the word omniverse. I'm going to try to use the Fortnite lingo in this section, but they purposefully incorporate different words, like they're playing a game of the floor is lava, but the floor is using the word multiverse. So anyway, the Nothing wants to maintain control of the 0 point, which is the point where all of existence sprung from. Part of this plan involved having an organization called the Imagined Order create an artificial island over the 0 point. Using the power of the 0 point, they were able to travel across different realities, which is the Fortnite word for universes, and bring more people into the organization. Their end goal was to create the perfect civilization, and to research what exactly that means, they created what is called the Loop, where they gather people from all across the Omniverse, wipe their memories, remove their ability to speak, disable any special abilities they might have, and they put them in a 22-minute time loop on an island where they all fight to the death while the IO studies them. If somebody manages to escape the loop, they are replaced with a snapshot or a perfect copy of them at one point in time, which is a lore explanation for why you can still see 616 Spider-Man gunning people down while he's doing his thing in the comic books. I could go way more into the lore of Fortnite and talk about the fall of the Imagined Order and what Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson's role is in all of this, but the more I speak on the subject, the higher chance I have of a 14-year-old typing up a 5,000-word essay in the comments on everything I got wrong. Plus, this video is strictly about how crossovers work in different games and their lore explanations for them, and I feel like I summed that up really nicely in the previous paragraph. It's just a bunch of evil science nerds yoinking people from across the multiverse, or omniverse, wiping their memories and throwing them onto an island with zero context and all of the guns. I read this lore and I was like, yeah, that's about as good of a reason I could come up with if you asked me to pitch a lore explanation for why a mute Alan Wake is wearing a Ninja Turtles katanas on his back while doing the Lethal Company dance for Eminem, who is riding an air scooter. Like, if I were to study beings from across all of existence, I too would be like, alright, I'll have a Billie Eilish with a side of Paul Atreides and the chicken from Family Guy. You know, in my opinion, Fortnite's incorporation of the multiverse and their explanation for why the crossovers are happening is roughly the same level of janky as multiverses. I can kind of buy scientists running an experiment at the center of the multiverse, though I'm not sure if it's any better than a magical dog takes on the role of Nick Fury, but then a gremlin shows up, parentheses, gone wrong, close parentheses. The simplicity of Fortnite's explanation and the fact that they aren't winking at the camera going, hey, doesn't this make you want to buy this? With like all of the meta humor. It does give them a bit of a plus though I'm not super sold on the idea of the reason why Spider-Man is shooting people is because he was essentially lobotomized. I have a few questions and a few possible plot holes that I can think of, but once again, I'm afraid if I say anything more, it's going to be a bat signal to the world's most condescending middle schoolers, so we're just going to move on to something I know a little bit more about. Dead by Daylight is basically a slasher movie simulator. It revolves around a central antagonist known as the Entity, who is a malevolent entity whose primary goal seems to be the destruction of the multiverse. I'm noticing a theme here. The Entity feeds off of emotion, and one of its many ways of harvesting that emotion is by taking people into its own pocket dimension known as the Entity's realm, or often called the Fog, and forcing them into a lethal game of freeze tag, essentially. Killers will attack survivors and sacrifice them to the Entity, and survivors will try to repair generators to power exit gates so they can escape the killer. If a person is more prone to feelings like anger and bloodlust, then the Entity is going to designate them as a killer so it can suck up those emotions from them. If the person is more prone to emotions like hope, fear, happiness, and despair, then they are designated as survivors. For example, this is Dwight, and this is Evan. According to Dead by Daylight lore, Dwight struggled living paycheck to paycheck, but would often take the time to stand up for the little guy. And Evan, on the other hand, was the son of a coal mine owner, and he would often set up traps in the mines to harm his father's workers just to be a douche, and eventually he collapsed an entire mine shaft on the workforce when they threatened to unionize. So Dwight naturally became a survivor, and Evan, despite how friendly and cuddly he looks, became a killer. About half of Dead by Daylight's roster are original characters created for Dead by Daylight specifically, and the other half are crossovers with other IP, mainly horror. And then there's just Nicolas Cage chilling there, just the man himself, not any of his characters. The in-game lore seems to imply that all of the originals come from one universe, while all of the licensed characters come from their respective universes. And it appears to be complicated when you notice that Michael Myers, Ash Williams, and Vecna from Dungeons & Dragons all coexist in the same realm as Stranger Things, even though Stranger Things references all of those as different pieces of media. According to Dead by Daylight lore, all fiction is not actually fiction, but rather another universe's reality that was delivered to the artist in the form of an epiphany or a dream by the Entity. So according to DBD lore, whatever you watch on TV, you play in a video game, or read is based on something that actually happened in another universe. In fact, some of Dead by Daylight's original characters are canonically fans of Resident Evil, so they get to meet the IRL versions of those protagonists in the Fog. I think most of the questions that people have regarding the logistics of this crossover lore would involve power scaling. For instance, before coming to Dead by Daylight, Leon Kennedy regularly delivered roundhouse kicks to 1,000-pound man-made abominations beyond our comprehension, but in DBD he can't fight back against the Legion, which is a group of 4 18-year-old kids who killed a total of 1 guy before coming to the Entity's realm. Or, on the other end of the spectrum, we have Vecna, who is a powerful spellcaster who has ascended to demigodhood on occasion, and he's getting stun-locked by a small Chinese woman who plays video games for a living. The answer to most of these questions is that the entity needs to feed off of the entire spectrum of emotion, and therefore, being an elder god, is able to nerf and buff people to the extent that it deems necessary to meet that end. However, in cases like Vecna, his lore implies that Vecna could, or at least thinks he could, overpower the entity, but he's intentionally playing along with the entity's rules while he learns more about the entity and plots his eventual takeover. The next big question would be as to whether or not these characters from these big IPs would behave the way that they do in Dead by Daylight. Like I said, the characters are all nerfed, so Ash Williams does not have a shotgun and a chainsaw for a hand, Chris Redfield does not have the ability to bust boulders with his bare fists, and Cheryl Mason can't exercise her God-given Second Amendment rights to shoot a god to death. So for the survivors, basically the only thing they can do is run and hide and occasionally fight back in a small way. So I guess it's pretty lore accurate to what these characters would do if they were stripped of all of their special abilities. And for all of the killers in Dead by Daylight, they kind of carefully craft the lore entries to explain why they decided that they would start killing for the entity. Michael Myers does this because it's simply in his nature to kill. Leatherface does it because he got taken into Dead by Daylight literally as he watched Sally Hardesty escape him at the end of the film, so he sees this kind of as like his redemption round, and so on. The main ones that are weird to me are Sadako Yamamura from The Ring, because she's not really a run in circles and chase her victims type of gal. Hunk from Resident Evil, because going after civilians isn't really his style. Chucky, because I've never seen him do this in any of the movies, and Pyramid Head, because Pyramid Head's entire existence and purpose was just to punish James Sunderland. Nobody else should be seeing Pyramid Head unless they too are a product of James's mind. An explanation that the developers have given is not everything that happens in the game of Dead by Daylight is exactly a one-to-one representation of how it happens in the entity's realm from a lore perspective, and they just have to kind of like balance it this way so the game stays the same. Also, some of the killers in DBD canonically are brainwashed into seeing the survivors as people who piss them off in their lives, and that could be a reason for like Hunk or some other killers who wouldn't really be inclined to just kill randos. There are also some issues with how being sucked into Dead by Daylight might affect the canon of the survivors and killers' homeworlds. Like in Stranger Things, the kids are taken around the time of season 3, but they're clearly back for season 4, and so I think the answer to this is that either they were taken from a universe nearly identical to the universe in which the media takes place, or it could be that if they eventually escape from the entity's realm, they're plopped right back into the reality, none the wiser, and not nearly as traumatized as they would be. Overall, if I were to rate how well Dead by Daylight handles the lore side of their crossovers, I'd say they're doing a pretty good job so far. I would definitely say they do a lot better job than Fortnite or MultiVersus, but this is probably due in big part to how Dead by Daylight more or less stays in its lane. Rather than trying to fit superheroes with no kill rules into a shooter game, or try to excuse why Gizmo the Mogwai is edge-guarding Superman, they're trying to fit predominantly horror characters into a horror scenario. And they have decent writers who usually understand the characters pretty well, and as such the lore entries for the crossover characters sound like, at worst, medium quality fanfiction, and at best, an extension of the character's story. Heck, in some cases it enhances the character. Like for Alan Wake, his lore is simply that he used his reality-bending powers to write himself into Dead by Daylight because he came up with the idea years ago when writing TV episodes. It's even implied that he may have created the entity in its realm and the entire scenario of Dead by Daylight, though that's intentionally left up for interpretation. So overall, they did good, but I can think of one crossover game that has even better lore. Now for the granddaddy of all crossover games, Super Smash Bros. And I get that this is a bit of a cop-out because Smash Bros. Isn't really a multiverse game, but this series has all of the DNA of a multiversal game in the sense that each entry in the series is a massive crossover event in which you see characters that would in no way ever interact with each other suddenly punch the crap out of each other. And in a genre full of corporate entities trying to say, no, I promise this makes sense why these two are fighting, now please give us your money, it's refreshing to see the Giga Chad response of, None of this makes sense, so we decided that you're not actually playing as Mario, Link, or Pikachu. The introduction for the first Smash Bros. Game lays it all out for you. Rather than being canonical versions of these characters, you are edge-guarding, wave-dashing, and F-tilting with toy versions of the iconic gaming legends, and it all takes place in a kid's imagination. This was confirmed by Satoru Iwata in a 2015 interview with Time magazine, meaning that at the very least, the first 4 Super Smash Bros. Games take place in someone's imagination as they play with their plushies, and in later games, it's implied that they are just imagining their figurines fighting each other. In the Smash Bros. Series, Master Hand and Crazy Hand represent the elements of creation and destruction that are involved with imaginative play. And it's all fun and games until we hit the third game in the series, Super Smash Bros. Brawl. This game introduces a new story mode called the Subspace Emissary, which comes with the final twist that Master Hand is under the control of an enemy known as Taboo, which is maybe a little on the nose. For those of you who don't know, the word taboo means something that is forbidden or looked down on, which can be in reference to how, as you age, imagination is increasingly de-incentivized. If you're at an airport waiting for your flight and you see a 5-year-old playing with their toys, smashing them against each other, trying to make them fight, you might think, oh, that's cute. But if you see a 31-year-old doing the exact same thing, you might be trying to see if the next flight has any open seats. Smash 4 and Super Smash Bros. Ultimate introduced the themes of burnout and balance between light and darkness, but based on precedent, I think we can assume that the overarching setting and premise of these games is that they all take place in someone's imagination as they grow up and go through different phases of life. The whole premise that Smash Bros. Takes place in your imagination, having characters fight each other, might seem like a cheap workaround to some, but honestly, I think it's the best way to make this whole thing work. It takes all of the flaws that we've mentioned that come with the lore for multiverse games, like justifying out-of-character actions, being sloppily put together, and being obvious nostalgia bait, and it says, yeah, that is what we're doing, but we're doing it specifically for the sake of it being imagination and nostalgia. I think the sincerity and, frankly, more ethical business practices of Super Smash Bros. Makes it evoke the feeling of playing pretend as a kid rather than feeling like a hollow cash grab. Don't get me wrong, at the end of the day, Nintendo is still not your friend. To them, you are still just a sack of cash with arms and legs, but at the very least, they're able to give you the warm and fuzzies while allowing you to make Mario beat up his best pal Yoshi. I'm sure by now that there have been people who came to the comment section to say stuff like, why does everything need a story? Or, bro actually plays these games for the plot. And to those baboon brain buffoons, I'll have to point you to exactly 21 minutes and 45 seconds ago when I said that I don't really care about all of this, at least not on a get offended level. I just like to see what the why is for all of these things. I'm not gonna boycott multiverses because it makes the Iron Giant hit children. I'm gonna play it because I think that's funny. I just like looking at these things because I enjoy the lore for games and I like stories. It's how humans have communicated since the dawn of time. So if lore is something that interests you, then I would invite you to hit that little subscribe button. But either way, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. I hope it was able to inject at least a little bit of dopamine into your system. I hope you have a good rest of your day, and I will catch you on the next one.